What's up, everybody? It's HBT with Straight Up Wrestling Show. Man, I'm going to talk about something, man. I'm just going to talk about one thing today, man. I'm going to talk about the style of the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And yes, I started watching Ric Flair all the way back in the early to mid 70s, and pretty much first checked him out, saw him, probably was 1974 when I really first saw him in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. I was around 7 years old at that time when he first arrived on the scene, and he was teaming up with Rip Hawk. And when he came in, he was a big guy. He was bigger than what he was a little bit later after the plane crash. He was a big guy, and I'll say he was like 6'2", 300 pounds at the time. And after the plane crash, he was 6'1", and he dropped down to like 247 and got like flamboyant and became more of a athletic type wrestler, not the athlete that you see of a Ricochet status or maybe even the young Bucks. I mean, not that type of. I say he probably could match them when it boiled down to it, but not Ricochet, because back then Ric Flair, man, he had he had the diving elbows. He did a lot of athletic things back at that time, but he still was pretty much subdued because of his back injury. But man, this video right here, this audio video that I'm gonna be talking about, I'm just gonna be talking about Ric Flair and talking about the style of Ric Flair. This right here is just about Ric Flair's style and how his style added on to what he actually became, and it was something that he could be heavily identified by, is his style. Now, this guy had a style, man, that just transcended not just only wrestling. It basically hit the general public, and it just went wow, and it just added to the mystique of Ric Flair. And even if you did not like Ric Flair, especially, if you was in the South at the time, you saw him a good bit anywhere in the South, because that's where Jim Crockett Promotions pretty much promoted, was basically South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. But it definitely got caught up into the other states that was close to the proximity, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. People in the South knew about him, and he actually got to wrestle up north some, and out in the Midwest, man, definitely. So he got to be known all over the country, and then he got to be known all over the world. But this man his style was evident from the get-go. Even though he was teaming up with Rip Hawk, who had a style of his own. Rip Hawk used to be there, they became Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Champions. And, I mean, very good tag team. And Rip Hawk will be smoking a cigar. And Ric Flair, Ric Flair will have these nice threads, clothes back then. But he basically had this, I guess you got to look at the times. He dressed for the times. And I will look at him. He wearing the shades, and he will have those plaid pants with the stacks on, and those shirts, those multicolored shirts or whatever. But it still looked kind of cool on him at that time. But he was kind of like close to what Dusty Rhodes was doing at that time. And yeah, he was trying to be Dusty Rhodes. He wanted to be rambling Dusty Rhodes when he first came out. So yeah, he had a Dusty Rhodes type style, but his style was a little bit different, but it was very close to what Dusty Rhodes did. So, going on in that tag team, like I say, it was pretty good. And I kept an eye on this guy, man. And I'm like, I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, he's pretty good. But he was not Rip Hawk. Rip Hawk was the man in that tag team. But Rip Hawk, he was getting up there in age. He was in his mid to late 40s. And Ric Flair was like 24 at this time, 24, and I think he turned 25 and 75, something like that. But he was in his early 20s. Outstanding competitor, but like I say, he was a big powerhouse guy, because I mean, he used to hang out. I think he was roommates with Ken Patera, and he wanted to be a power lifter. Then he ended up getting in the plane crash, and in the plane crash with some other wrestlers and a couple commentary guys in the plane crash, and he injured his back. He came back after the doctor said he would never walk again. You guys know the story, especially if you know who Ric Flair is, in which a lot of you, I'm pretty sure, if you're a wrestling fan, you know who he is. You know the story. And he came back, and when he came back, Ric Flair was a slimmer wrestler, a smaller version than what he was before. Still a good-sized guy, but he came back, and Ric Flair came back with a new, I guess you could say, new flair, a new style. Ric Flair came and he was adorning robes, man. He was having these outstanding robes that was made for him, and I forgot whose wife was making those robes for him. I can't think of that right now, but he was coming back. He had these beautiful, beautiful robes, and he was saying they was cost $10,000. And I wasn't sure about that. I'm like, man, that's a lot of flipping money, and he had a lot of those things. So I'm like, wow. And yes, he was being touted as the man who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, because his mom was a lawyer and his dad is a doctor. So yes, he was born in, when he was born, and yes, he was adopted, but we didn't know at that time. And until a couple of years later, and they started saying, he was adopted, but he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So he had parents that was making plenty of money. So he was born rich. So I'm like, okay, maybe he had all that money from them. And yes, he was drawing crowds wherever he went in the Carolinas, because he started off early. When he came back from a plane crash, he was in a big feud with Wahoo McDaniel. He was feuding with Paul Jones. He was feuding with Mr. Wrestling too. And then come in 1976, Ricky Steamboat hit the scene, and they had feuds like crazy. They had a big, huge feud. And then Roddy Piper hit the scene in like 1978 in the Mid-Atlantic. In 78, 79, they had a huge feud with him, and he teamed up with Greg the Hammer Valentine, and they won the United States, not the United States, but the World Tag Team Championship from the Anderson brothers, who, in my opinion, is the greatest tag team of all time. And they was just terrors, man, him and Greg Valentine as a tag team, great tag team. But Ric Flair, everywhere he went, he was selling out, man, big time. So yes, he started making money at that time. And I mean, he started making big money. And I know this for a fact. And yes, he won the United States Heavyweight Championship, which was right in second in line to the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, which at that time, the NWA World Heavyweight Championship was the championship. It was the biggest prize in pro wrestling, hands down, man. I mean, the WWF title was a regional title, and they was part of the NWA on a few different occasions, a couple different occasions at the time. They dropped out and they came back, but it was just a big region up in New York City. Up in New York, they did Madison Square Garden, and they did go to the Boston Garden, I think, and they was going to the Washington Capitol Center. But they had that little region they had that big region of the country, which made them look pretty big. But they did not. The WWF champion did not go all over the world to defend his title. He just didn't do that. Now, you did have the WWF World Heavyweight Champion. They would wrestle the NWA champion, which was Harley Race. At that time, Harley Race ended up taking on superstar Billy Graham, and I think he did have a match with Bob Backlund, and then Ric Flair, when he got the title later on, went against Bob Backlund. So great stuff, man, great stuff. But Ric Flair defended against everybody. He went everywhere, and he was going everywhere. He became world famous years before he became a world heavyweight champion. He was out there with Andre the Giant, out wrestling Andre the Giant in Florida, and I mean, I think they was doing Buffalo, New York, over in Japan. He was wrestling, Andre the Giant. He was up against, Giant Baba and people like that over in Japan, and Antonio Inoki. He had confrontations with these guys. So Ric Flair was out there wrestling everybody, and I mean, he was doing this around 76, 77, and he was becoming a huge guy in this business. Now, if they had the media back then that were following him, like, say, Bruno Sammartino, who had then Bob Backlund, who had that New York media, that was behind them. If Ric Flair had that kind of media with the style, and I'm going back to style, guys, with the style he had, the charisma he had, and the great in-ring ability that he had. And if you did not see Ric Flair from the 70s, you got to see Ric Flair from 77 to around 83. 84, man. I mean, immaculate, dominant. He says his prime between 86 and 89. I say that was his prime because he pretty much, I will go ahead and go with him on his prime there because he had the best competition ever during that time. His run, that was a huge stretch run of victories for him over some great, outstanding wrestlers. So I will go with him, excuse me, on that. But between 76, I say 77 and 83, man, this guy was dynamic. The best wrestler that I seen. That 6-year period right there was just outstanding, man. So if you ever want to see somebody that was just really incredible, look up everything you can from 77 to 83 from this man, and this man right here. Then going back to the style, guys, his style changed. Like I said, he was adorning these great robes, man, that was made for him, coming in there, and anytime he entered the ring, especially when he won the United States Championship, or he had the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship, and he had the World TV Championship back then, the NWA World TV Championship, he comes in and he pulled that robe back, and, you know, he exposes his belt. But those robes, a lot of the robes, man, was just dynamic. They was outstanding looking robes. Some of the robes I really didn't care for, but it just really set him off. In the suits, he always came out in suits back then. And it was usually 3-piece suits. Most times it was 3-piece suits. Sometimes he would just have a blazer on and a nice tie, whatever. But man, and a little bit later on in the 80s, man, he started rocking the jewelry with his suits, but his suits was just great looking on him. And it was tailor-made. You know, he said it was tailor-made hand to toe. And I'm pretty sure he was buying most of these suits anyway. Because I remember in the early 80s, man, Ric Flair was downtown Greenville, South Carolina, at the Ramada, the Ramada where all the wrestlers used to stay. And he came in and he was up there and he was buying drinks for everybody. He ran out of cash, man, and they used to cash the wrestlers' checks. And I mean, this was around 80, 83, 84, I think. I can't remember something. It was one of those 2 years. And he had his check with him. And my brother's girlfriend used to work there. So Ric Flair put his check up there, cashed his check, $10,614 back then. So, I mean, he was making all kinds of money, man. He was making a lot of flipping cash. And I know other wrestlers had big paydays like that too, but that's for one night at the Greenville Memorial Auditorium. But he was making big time money. But the guy, his style, man, the way he dressed was just unreal. I have to say he's one of the best dressed men that was in the country at that time. You know, I didn't see too many individuals that pretty much emulated that came on that same level. And I'm gonna go and I'm gonna talk about pimps, and I'm gonna talk about people, man, that was in movies and stuff. I mean, movies that they made, and they had time to really think about these characters and what kind of suits they want to put these guys on. But none of these guys, when it boils down to it, hardly any of them. There was hardly any time you would see a character in a movie or a music video or anything that came close to the sharp dressed man that Ric Flair was, man. And I'm talking about every single week on TV. This guy was just head to toe, man. He was just blazing. He blazed the trail for style and finesse that I don't see being touched right now. I mean, being touched back then or even touched now. He was an incredible fashion icon back in the day. Just incredible, man. And yes, I wish he had. Because, you know, this was around the time Hogan had got into the game with the WWE with him and Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon just shot him to the moon. But, man, that was Ric Flair. Now, McMahon wanted Ric Flair. He wanted Dusty Rhodes first, and then he wanted Ric Flair. No, I think he wanted Magnum TA. But, you know, he couldn't get Magnum. Then he wanted either Dusty or Ric Flair. But, man, Ric Flair could no telling where he would have went, man, if Vince McMahon would have put that machine behind him. But Ric Flair, that style, man, it's just unmatched. It was unmatched. So, yes, I'm talking about the style of Ric Flair. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the style, how that style pretty much elevated him in ring. It elevated his in ring, what he did in the ring. Yes, it elevated him on the mic. Gave him all the confidence in the world to put out those blazing outstanding, superior talks on the mic the way he just came off with his segments, man, was just banging. And just a lot of it straight off the head, and some of it he thought about it before he even got to before he got to the wrestling studio to give these outstanding takes or give these outstanding speeches that he did. But man, incredible, and a lot of that had to do with the way he dressed and everything. He knew he looked good. He knew he looked good head to toe, and man, he really believed everything that he was saying. And yes, he had a lot of the money. He had a lot of money to do exactly a lot of the things that he said. And he had the confidence of having just about any woman that he really wanted, to tell you the truth. So, I mean, it's crazy. I'm not up here. I'm not praising his lifestyle, man, because a lot of it was a lot of trouble because Ric Flair, you know, he got married over and over again, but he kept on playing this lifestyle, and he played that lifestyle up. You know, he played it to the max, straight up, man. He played it to the max. He was what his character is. He was that. And yes, man, that style just, man, it put him over the top, not just on his promos, but in ring. He took that style that he had, that fashion sense that he had, and it pretty much, you know, it helped him out in the ring. And I think a lot of wrestlers that wrestled him, you know, they might have been like, man, this is the man. This guy right here. He's got the money. He's got the women. He's got the clothes. He's got the cars. Man, he's got the jets. He's got it all, man. He's got it all. But it all came down to this guy right here, just looking at dressing a certain way and being superior at that. And a lot of it came from his robes, guys. Robes right into his suits and everything. Just outstanding of the things that he did. And he pulled it off. He looked good all the time. And first thing, when I first saw Ric Flair like that after the plane crash, okay, his style. When at first, it made me think about somebody. It was a guy we used to call Sweet. I forgot his last name. I forgot his name was Sweet Easy or something like that. Back when I was a kid, back in Sterling. Back in Sterling, back in the day, you know, I'm talking about, man, this is back in the hood, man, over there in the Justin area in Greenville, West Greenville, the Justin area. Guy used to come through, and we'd be up playing pool or whatever, you know, playing pinball machines in the Sterling Community Center, you know, walking through, and this guy came walking through, and he was a great diver, man. One thing that was great about this guy, his name, we used to call him Sweet. And he come walking through one day. He had this suit on and adorned in gold and all this, and he, you know, gold on his fingers, gold on his you know, gold bracelets, gold chains, and he had this green and white suit. I will never forget it, with white Stacey Adams, and just the guy was adorned up and down. Man, he looked great, outstanding. And he come walking through, and everybody just looked at him, man, about woo. You know, everybody just hit that Ric Flair woo. And this was before I heard Ric Flair do it. I mean, you know, this was around when I was 7 years old. And he, you know, everybody was like, woo, you know, just, and I was just stunned at the way the guy looked. He just, I guess you could say a little bit later on, when you think about the drug dealers, the big time drug dealers, the people that really was calling the shots, making the most money and out there really trying to impress. That's what he looked like at that time. And Sweet, he was come to the local swimming pool. He would go swimming, and the guy was the best diver, man. He was like, you know, he would come off the high dive, the low dive. He looked like, you know, he looked like Mark Spitz or somebody. Well, Mark Spitz, I think, used to swim, but I'm trying to think of a great diver. But he looked like one of the Olympic divers. He just was great, outstanding at everything that he did. And I don't think he ever was, we didn't ever know him as far as drug dealing or whatever. I don't know. Because, I mean, I was a kid at that time. I wasn't sure. But, man, you know, he looked fabulous. And as soon as I seen Ric Flair, I'm like, wow. How Ric Flair just, when I hit like 8 years old. Because I saw Ric Flair when I was 7 years old. Saw him when I was 6, you know, in the early 70s. And then 75, mid-70s, and when I saw Ric Flair, I thought about that moment. Every time I saw Ric Flair, I would think about that moment. When I saw this guy, man, Sweet. We used to call him Sweet. Come through the hood, come at the Sterling Community Center. I will think about the Nature Boy Ric Flair. I'm like, wow, man, wow. So every time I looked at Ric Flair for like the next past 10 years, I will compare Ric Flair to that guy. I was like, wow, that's the only thing I could compare Ric Flair to. Even though I saw Elvis in the best suits, I saw Elvis looking outstanding. I saw Michael Jackson looking outstanding. I saw James Brown looking outstanding. I saw James Bond looking outstanding. You know, Sean Connery or Roger Moore looking outstanding in suits in movies. Saw other people. You know, movies. I seen other singers and things like that, man, just look great, Dapper Dan, you know, head to toe. But compared to Ric Flair, man, these guys was just, it seemed modest compared to Ric Flair. And it probably wasn't, to tell you the truth. If they stood side by side, they probably wasn't. But Ric Flair, man, had that vernacular. He had that, you know, I mean, he had that, you know, that Louisville lip, you know, like Muhammad Ali, you know, the gift of gab. And that just took it over the top. So that style that the Nature Boy had, man, just amazing. Just amazing. So, yes, all about that style, man. And a lot of people, there was wrestlers that came behind him that tried to emulate that style. And, yes, we could go back and say, okay, he wasn't the original Nature Boy. He wasn't the original Nature Boy, copied the gimmick off of Buddy Rogers. But Buddy Rogers didn't take it to that level. Buddy Rogers did have a style. Buddy Rogers was a handsome man. You know, Flair was the same way, but he came and copied Buddy Rogers as far as the hair go and some of the things. But, you know, I guess you could put the hair thing with Dusty Rhodes because he already did his hair blonde and all that. But Buddy Rogers will come out there more with like a jacket on, you know, some kind of sports jacket, which I used to like those sports jackets. And my man George Soft started wearing those things. And I did like George Soft when he was wearing them in the 80s. When he first broke into the business. I mean, when he was an early young man in the business in the 80s, he would wear those jackets. I used to love that. And I see George Soft every now and then a good bit, and I want to say something to him about it because I really admired those jackets that he used to wear. And I used to be wondering where in the world you could get those jackets at, you know, that George Soft used to wear. But a lot of those jackets, man, they was available in Family Dollar stores and things like that. And it's true, straight up. But George Soft made those jackets look more expensive than what they actually were. But those were some nice jackets. But my mom didn't shop in those stores. So I didn't get to see those. My mom, my dad had passed, we got a little bit of money. We never did go into the stores like that. I hate to say that. But, but man, I mean, yeah. So, but Ric Flair, man, the styles that this guy had was just flipping incredible in the things that he was able to do. But that style helped elevate him so much, you know, in his in-ring and outside of his ring, and had it pretty much had his confidence sky high, man. His confidence was, nobody could take down his confidence because of who he was and what he was, until somebody came in. Jim Herd came in and said, hey, cut your hair. Cut your hair. Man, that hair was part of Ric Flair. It was part of that style. But, you know, before I get to that, yeah, just, you know, other wrestlers that came in. There was wrestlers that came in and tried to emulate what Ric Flair was doing as far as his style go. And I know Ric Flair could piece that style. Yeah, he might have saw superstar Billy Graham doing some things and some other people. He got Dusty Rhodes. He took pieces from those players. But to tell you the truth, Ric Flair, he did that before superstar Billy Graham really shot up like that. So Ric Flair, I got to give it to him first. But, you know, you had people like Austin Idol that came in. I'm going to say superstar Billy Graham. Some of these guys, man, you know, they pretty much, Eddie Mansfield, let's see, Chick Donovan, let's see, who else? It was other ones, man, but, you know, and then Buddy Landell, definitely Buddy Landell. They came and they took a page out of Ric Flair's book, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, and tried to be like Ric Flair. And even Triple H, when he first came in, he came into WCW at first. He was a clone of Ric Flair. I forgot what he called himself, but yeah, he was a clone of Ric Flair. So Ric Flair, man, he was duplicated. He was you know, often duplicated, but never, you know, often imitated, but never duplicated. Straight up, you know, there was people out here jocking in style, man. So hey, that was a hard style to try to jock, and hard, you know, just a hard. that was a hard play to try to follow, man, because it's only one Ric Flair, and he did the thing, man. And yes, Ric Flair, that style of Ric Flair, straight up, the best, man, straight up. Peace.